Hey, how's it going everyone, and welcome to another crash course. This video I'm going to run you through the basics of React routing, and I will put a bit more focus on the version 6 which was just released a couple of weeks ago. Now this is only a crash course, so please don't expect to become a React routing master after this crash course, but you will have some basic understanding of it. What you will learn at the end of this crash course is what React Router is, how to set it up, and how it works. And you will also have a basic understanding of the most commonly used React routing components. Now, after a short presentation about React Router, we will also create an application, an Invoice application using React Router, but more about the application a bit later on. Now, as always, the source code and the presentation for this video is down in the description below, so please feel free to check it out. Now, if you're excited for this video, then please give it a thumbs up and help me out with the YouTube algorithm. You know how it works. Okay, so that's basically it. Let's jump into the course. For those of you who never used React Router, you might be wondering what exactly React Router is, what it does, and how it can help you build your application. First, let's start with what React Router is. React Router is pretty simple. It isn't just about matching a URL to a function or a component, it's more about building a useful user interface. React Router is a standard library for routing in React. It enables navigation between views of various components in the React application. It also changes the browser URL and keeps the UI in sync with the UR. Also, don't worry if you don't get all of the terminologies. After this short presentation, as I promised, we will create a simple application in order to understand how React Router actually works. But first, some definitions. There are a lot of ideas around routing from back and from end frameworks. Sometimes a word in one context might have different meanings than another. So let's go through the basic terminologies in React Router. First, the router. The router is a stateful, top-level component that makes all other components and hooks work. The route is an object or route element, typically with a shape of path and element or route path element. The path is the path pattern. When the path pattern matches the current URL, the element will be rendered. Now, an outlet is a component that renders the next match in a set of matches. A pattern route, a route with child routes. And now the browser router is a router implementation that uses the HTML5 history API like push state, replace state, and the pop state event to keep your UI in sync with your URL. And you will see later on that we're going to replace browser router with router. So a couple of things that are new to version 6 for those of you coming from version 5. A very important update is the switch is gone, and now instead of switch we have routes. So basically all of our routes will be encapsulated in the routes component. React Router 6 introduces the routes component that is kind of like a switch, but a lot more powerful. The main advantages of routes over switch are as following. All routes and links inside a routes tag are relative. This leads to leaner and more predictable code in route path and link to. Routes are chosen based on the best match instead of being traversed in order. This avoids bugs due to unreachable routes because they were defined later in your switch. Routes may be nested in one place instead of being spread out in the different components. In small to medium-sized apps, this lets you see all your routes at once. In larger apps, you can still nest routes in bundles that you load dynamically via React Lazy. So what is so important about route, path, and link to? First of all, they are relative. This means that they are automatically built on the pattern routes, path, and URL, so you don't have to manually interpolate match URL or match path. Route exact is gone. Instead, routes with descendant routes, defined in other components, use a trailing star in their path to indicate their match deeply. You may put your routes in whatever order you wish, and the router will automatically detect the best route for the current URL. This prevents bugs due to manually putting routes in the wrong order in a switch. So what are the advantages of the route element? The fallback prop takes a React element, not a component. This lets you easily pass whatever props you want to your snipper from the component that renders it. Using elements instead of components means we don't have to provide a pass props style API so you can get the props you need to your elements. Another important reason for using the elements prop in version 6 is that route children is reserved for nesting routes. And this is one of my personal favorite features, and you also see it in the app. Okay, so that's it for the presentation. It's time to start our application. So before I'm going to show you the application, let's take care of creating a React app so it installs. In the meantime, I'm going to show you the application. So I'm going to use Visual Studio Code as my code editor, so we can just open up the terminal. And within a folder, let's just create our React app by typing in npx create React app, and let's call it Invoice app. Let's hit enter, and this is going to install our React application. Now in the meantime, let me also show you the application itself. Now we're not going to do a too complex of an application, but I do wish to have most of the useful information packed in here. So we're going to have up here a navigation bar, and each of these links are actually links to a route. So if I would go to the home page, we get a title, and down here another link. If I would click on the link, this will send me to the about page where there's nothing here, and I could go back using again another link. Now this will send me to an index page, and we're going to talk about the index page later on. Now in order to get to the invoice itself, to the application itself, we need to click on Invoice, and this will open up our application. Again, all of these are routes. We can click on a route, and this will open up an invoice, and we can just click for them. We can also search for an invoice. Let's search for Tesla, and this will only search Tesla. And we can also delete a invoice. So let's, for example, search for Apple. Click on Apple. Also, we have a small little implementation of active links, and we could delete a invoice. So if I click on the delete button, this is going to remove it from our invoice. Let's also click on NVIDIA and delete NVIDIA. Now these are only deleted on the state level, so if I would refresh the page, they are going to come back. Now for styling, I'm going to use Bootstrap. To be more precise, I'm going to use Bootstrap 5 with Bootstrap icons. But you can also use Tailwind CSS or just regular CSS if you wish so. And also use Font Awesome instead of Bootstrap icons for different icons. Now while building the invoice application, we're going to cover the following things. We're going to cover configuring routes, navigating with links, creating links with active styling, using nested routes for layout, using URL Params for data loading, using URL search params, and navigate programmatically by deleting an invoice. Okay, so React should be installed by now. Now let's get into our application. So I'm going to make this smaller, put it on this side, and make our code editor also a bit smaller. Okay, now let's cd into Invoice app, and let's start our application by typing in npm and start. And yes, because I have a different port, and there we go, there's our application. Let me also make just a tinge larger. Now in order to use React Router, we need to install it as a dependency. So if you take a look in our package.json, right here, we are missing one dependency, and that is the React Router DOM. So not React Router, but React Router DOM. Now in order to install this dependency, we either stop our server or open up another terminal. So as you wish. I will just open up a new terminal, cd into Invoice app again, and within here I'm going to npm I React Router DOM. Hit enter, and you can watch here in the dependencies as React Router DOM should appear after just a couple of seconds. So just wait for it, and there we go. React Router DOM version 6.0.2. If you're watching this later on, maybe it's another version. You could also install exact versions by typing in npm install React Router -DOM and you will type in the exact version that you wish to install. You could also install a version 5 if you wish so, but the routes won't work. You will need to use switch. And also the code would be a bit different. Okay, so we got React Router DOM installed. Now we can close up that terminal. Also close up the package UI. And let's just do a bit of cleanup. So I'm going to delete app test, index CSS, logo SVG, report, and setup. Bye-bye. And now we have a couple of problems where we're going to solve them very quickly. So we don't need our logo SVG. We don't need our app.css. In the app index, we're going to delete this part, and then this part, and this part. So let's see, app, React DOM, that's it. Logo SVG, still missing one. Let's just see where it is. Oh yeah, we can also delete the entire header. Don't need this. And there we go, our app is up and working again. Okay, so first things first is setting up, or actually connecting our URLs. So we'll need to go to index.js. And as I said, the router is a top level component. So here is where we're going to import our browser router. And as I said, I'm going to import it as router. And we need to import this from the React Router DOM. And now I'm going to wrap our entire application into this router. So we're going to go down here and create a router tag, open and close router tag. I'm going to move this part up here. Okay, hit save, and that's it. Now on the app level, we're going to import a link. I'm going to go up here and say import link from React Router DOM. Now these links will be in a navigation. So I'm going to create a navigation. As I said, I'm going to use classes from Bootstrap. If you wish to use something else, then please feel free to do so. I'm going to use Bootstrap out of convenience. And also I do have a complete beginner Bootstrap course on Udemy. If you wish to check it out, link is down in the description below. Let's get started by first of all going to Bootstrap, clicking on Get Started, and I'm going to copy the CDN. So I'm going to copy this entire thing, go into our public folder, go into the index, and just paste it in here. And because we're already here, let me also copy in the icon CDN. So go to icons, go completely down here to the end of the page. Oh, there are a lot of links. Boom, 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 boom. And there's the CDN, copy this one for the icons and paste it in here. Okay, and this should work now. Now I can close this confidently and go into our app and create the nav tag. Let me go back to our application. Create a nav tag with the class of navbar, then another class of navbar extended, navbar expand, and navbar dark dash dark, which is going to be for text, and then the background will be BG primary, which is going to give me that blue background. Okay, within our navigation or nav tag, we're going to create a UL, an ordered list with the class of navbar nav, and also going to give everything that is in here a font size of 5, so FS5. Within our unordered list, we're going to use now not list items and not anchor tags, but this link tag right here. So these are opening and closing tags. We're going to use a link tag. You could also give them classes. So let's give this a class name of navlink. This is also a Bootstrap class, nav-link. Let's give it a title of home and back into our link again. Now this is going to go somewhere, and we can now use the to property, and we're going to tell it that it's going to go home, and we need the /. Okay, so there's a navigation with the home button. Now I am zoomed in a bit here, so if you're seeing something different or something smaller, it should look like this. But I am zoomed in a bit in order for all of you guys and girls to see what I'm doing. Okay, I'm going to copy this 2 more times, and I'm going to change the second one to invoice, actually invoices, and there should be a capital I, and the last one is going to be about, and you should be a capital A. Okay, and that's basically, well, almost it for our app. We can now move on to the next step, which is to add some routes. So within our source folder, I'm going to create another folder, and I'm going to call it routes. Within here, we're going to create 3 files. First one is going to be for home, so home.js. actually use capital letters. Home.js, then invoices.js, and then about.js. Next up, let's import them into our index.js and render our app at the different URLs by creating our first route configuration. Now, before we import them, let's also quickly export them. So let's go to our about, let's do RFC for React Functional Component. Go ahead and export about. Let's do here h1 class of display -1 and about. Now I'm going to just keep this in a copy. Let's move on to home, RFC, React Functional Component. This will be home, and the last one will be invoices. So RFC and invoices. Okay, now we can go back to our index.js. Now we can import our home, our about, and our invoices. So let's start up with home. Let's type in home and it should automatically appear. There we go, there's home, then invoices, and about. Okay, so we got all three of them in our index.js. Now that we have them imported, let's actually configure our router. For this, I'm going to first of all import our from React Router DOM route. Then we're going to go into our router and type in route. Now, a route can be a self-closing component, so I'm just going to close it up. And now I need to tell this the path. Now, the first route will be the app itself. So I'm going to use the path property here, and I'm going to send him to just slash. Now, the element for this route will be our app. So I'm going to cut this out and put it in here. The next route will be for home, for which the path will be home, and the element also will be home. And then comes invoice and about. So I'm just going to copy this, change this to invoice, and this should be element, and then about. Now let's start clicking on them and let's see what happens. Home, invoice, about. Well, nothing happens because we don't have a place where we can display them. And this is where the outlet comes into play. So let's go back to our app. Let's also import here outlet, and let's add our outlet down right after our navigation. So let's type in here, outlet, and close it up. Now if we click on our invoice, home, and about, we get into this error because all of these routes need to be packed into what we in version 5 called a switch. And now it's called routes. So let me bring in routes, and let's also bring in, and also let's wrap our routes around all of our routes. And after a quick refresh, we'll get our home page back again. Now you're probably wondering, where did everything go? This is where nested routes come into play. Now you may have noticed that everything is gone, and this is why repeating shared layouts is a bad idea. Now let's do something in order to handle this. First of all, nesting the route inside the app route. So instead of having here a self-closing tag, I'm going to just create an open tag and then a route closing tag. Within this app route, I'm going to put all of my other routes, and this should be here. Now when routes have children, it does two things. It needs the URLs slash plus the next page, the next route, and it will nest the UI components for shared layouts when the child routes matches. Okay, so now we can navigate through them, and this will send us to each and every page or each and every route, which again is rendered in this outlet right here. Okay, next up, let's try and list a invoice. Normally you'd be fetching data from a server somewhere, but for this tutorial, let's hard code some fake data in a data.js file, which we will put in a database folder. So let's close this up. Let's go to our source, create another folder. Let's just call it db. And within here, we're going to create a new file. Let's call it data.js. Now again, the code is down in the description below, so I would just suggest to copy and paste this in. It is basically just some strings, and there we go. So our invoices are composed out of names, numbers, amount, and due date. Okay, Now let's also export these invoices and let's add to them a functionality and let's call it get invoices. So let's do a export of a function and this function will get invoices. So basically just going to return this invoice variable right here. That's all it does. Now let's go ahead, go to our invoices, import our get invoices. So import get invoices from the database and the data file. Let's add it here as a variable. Select invoices and let's assign it to the get invoices. Now up here still, I'm first of all going to modify our div and put it into a container. So let's do here class name and I'm going to assign this to a container with a bg light, a margin top of 5, a rounded borders, a padding of 2, and a shadow class. And since I'm still getting an error, invoices has already been defined. Whoa. Oh, so that's why, because I pasted it in 2 times. Okay, and now it should work. Okay, now back to our invoices here. I'm going to change this up. Let's go to invoices. We're going to have this below box shadow and all the classes that I just typed in here. Let's also give this a max width. So style, I'm going to set it to a max width of, let's say 700 pixels. I'm going to change this H1 to a H4. I'm going to change the display to a display of 4 class. And let's also add on the y-axis a padding of 3 and a font weight of bold. Okay, now underneath our H4, I'm going to create a div with the class of row. And within here, I'm going to create a navigation, the class of col. It's going to place this as column number 1. You will see the point of this later on. And then within here, I'm just going to include our invoices. So let's do invoices. And from it, we are now going to extract each and every invoice. And for this, we're going to use the map. And within this, a callback function, we're going to call back on each and every invoice. And now each and every invoice is going to be, again, a link. So I'm going to use the link here. First of all, let's import it actually up here. We got React and we need to import link from React Router DOM. Now let's go down here and let's use our link tag. Within our link, we're going to send each and every invoice to, I'm going to use backticks because I want to be able to use interpolation. So invoices / and I'm going to use $ in order to interpolate each invoice dot. I'm going to extract from each invoice the number. After that, I'm going to also extract the key in order to be able to use maps, which is going to be invoice dot number. Yeah, no, still now should be closing here. And we're not done yet. We're also going to use here a class name of dflex. So each and every invoice will be displayed as flex. It's going to have a shadow. It's going to be a nav link. It's going to be a button, rounded pill, and let's just use the background primary. Actually, let me use white and margin of 2 all around and margin on the y-axis of 3. Okay, now within our link down here, between our 2 link tags, I'm going to also use the Bootstrap icons tag. So I'm going to use here a icon tag, which is going to have a class name of, I want to have this envelope, okay? So this, hey, where is it? It's gone. Class name of Bootstrap icons dash envelope and dash exclamation and dash fill. And also a margin to the end of 2. Now right after icon tag, let's also close it, we're going to use here the invoice dot name. Okay, and there we go. There are all of our invoices. Now if I click on them, let me actually make this a bit larger, you're going to see that it's going to send us to this number right here, which are actually their ID numbers, or we're going to use them as ID numbers later on. Okay, so that's it for this part. Now that we have all of our invoices, the home, invoice, about, these are all working. Let's see what would happen if we, would get unmatch page, or it's time to use the unmatch property, because if you click those links right here, inverse, nothing happens. And we need to be able to handle this kind of situation. And that's because none of the routes we're defining match the URL, like the ones we linked up to the invoice, so far and so on. Before we move on, it's good practice to always handle this with a no match case. Okay, so let's go back to the router config and add this no match case to the router. So let's go index, and right within our app, right at the end, we're going to create another route. Now the path of this route is going to be star. Now this star has a specific meaning, and it will only match when no other of these paths match, or routes to be more exact. Now for the element that is going to display, let's just say that it should display, let's use here main tag. I'm going to use main. Why aren't you letting me? Let's change this to React. I'm going to use a main tag. That's strange. Main tag, and open and close main tag. I'm going to give it the class of container, shadow, and margin from the top 5. And I'll say background of info. Now within our main tag, let's just quickly add a h2 with the class of display 2 and padding 5. It's going to give it the all around padding. And I actually can't use that here, but no problem. We're going to say that there's nothing here. Okay, so there were no match found. Now I'm also going to give the user the possibility to go back from this page. So let's add here another link tag. Do I have the links imported here? No. So we need to import link. Then go down here, use link. And this link is going to go to just slash, which is the home page, / that is. Let's also give it a class name of link, of nav link, so we have a bit of styling. And let's type in go or just back home. Okay, now let's try this. Let's go back. Let me refresh this. We are in our invoices. Now if I click on any of this, they're going to send me to here. There's nothing here. And we can also go back then. Okay, so this is working. Whenever there's no match for any of these routes, it's going to give me this page. Now next up, let's talk about reading URL parameters. In an individual invoice URLs, let's add a route for a specific invoice. And for this, you are going to make a new component in your invoice, in your routes, which we're going to call invoice. So not invoices, but one specific invoice.js. Okay, we're going to return from here RFC and just return, let's say, a h2 for now, and just say invoice and some kind of hash, because we don't have any numbers, no invoice specifically, just a invoice. Now let's go to our index.js, and within our invoices, let's create here a opening and closing tag instead of a self-closing tag, route. And within our route, we're going to nest another route. So again, route, close this one up. The path will be the invoice ID. So we're going to use column, invoice, and ID. Okay. And as the element, well, it's going to be that invoice. So let's assign it. So let's assign it to a invoice element. Okay. And we also need to import this invoice. So let's go up here. Let's see, we have invoices, and let's import invoice. And now it should work. Okay, now let's go to invoices and click on Apple Inc. And well, you can see nothing happens because there's no place where it can be rendered. Now for this, we need to add another outlet to our invoice. So let's go back to invoices, and right after navigation, we're going to add another outlet. So first of all, let's import outlet. Let's go up here, outlet, and let's add it right after the navigation. Okay, and can you already see that there are our invoices? Now all we need to do now is open up the invoice component, and let's get the invoice ID parameter from the URL. Now this is done by importing Let's go first of all into our invoice. So I'm going to comment this one out. Actually, I could just copy it. Copy it. I'm going to leave this in order for you to have it in the code down below. So let's go into invoice, and instead of this hash, I'm going to use the invoice ID here. Now, before we do that, we need to import the use parameters from our React router. So let's import use params. Now, I'm also going to change this div to a section tag. And I will also give this section tag now a class of column. Now, as soon as I do this, you can see this is now a separate column. This one was one column. If we go back to invoices, and there we go. The nav was one column. And as soon as there is an invoice, there's going to be the second column. Because if I only click on invoices, there's nothing. If I click on one invoice, then that invoice should appear, whichever invoice that is. So let's link up that invoice. Let's go back to invoice. There we go. We have our use param. Now above our return, I'm going to initiate here a let. I'm going to call this param. Params, and let's use params on it. Let's assign use params. And now I can use it within here, params dot, and I can now call upon the invoice ID. Okay, and there we go. Apple has the ID of 1984, then Microsoft 1980, Nvidia 2003, Manhattan Media, and Tesla. Okay, so this is what I use for the IDs. But now we can actually extend upon our invoice by extracting more data from the database. For example, getting the invoice name, number, amount, and this is done by creating another function in our database. So let's go data. Let's go down here and let's say get invoices. But we're going to add a parameter to this, which is going to be numbers. So let's create another function, export function. I'm going to get invoices. We're going to get invoice by type in here a parameter number. I'm going to return our invoices, but I'm going to use the find method on it. And with the find method, we can now type here whichever invoice we pass in here. Why are you capitalized? Whichever invoice we pass in here is going to return a invoice dot number. So whichever parameter is passed in here, not numbered. And this should be equal to the number. Okay, so let's use this. Let's go back to the invoice. Let's bring it in. Let's see, we don't have it here. So let's import get invoice from the database. We're going to again assign it here. Let invoice. And I'm going to assign this to get invoice. And we're going to pass in the parameters here. So I'm going to use whatever is passed in here. First of all, is going to be parsed. So I'm going to use parse int because we're actually extracting strings and I need a number. So, and we're going to pass in here the params dot invoice ID, and let's use 10. And now we can go down here. I'm going to actually comment this one out. And now let's create a real invoice. And I'm going to use a card component from Bootstrap. So let's start up by creating a div with a class of card and a class of shadow, which is going to contain another class of card header with a background primary. So bg primary. The text is going to be white. And let's close this one up. And within here, we're going to include our invoice dot name, and after that a column with invoice dot number. Okay, so let's hit save, and if I click on Apple, there we go, Microsoft, Nvidia, so far and so on. Now let's continue on. We're not done yet. After our card header, we're going to have a card body. So card body, and once again, this is all in my Bootstrap course, so if you wish to check it out, please feel free to do so. Now the card body is going to contain the card title. There's going to be another class of card title, which actually I'm going to use h5 here. So h5 tag with the card title and plus, let's see, hey, why aren't you working? Okay, let's just use body. Within here, we're going to have an h5 with the class of card title. And after the card title, we're going to have a paragraph tag with the class of card text. So let's also populate this. The cart title will be total due column, and within here we're going to pass in the amounts. So invoice amount. In the cart text, we're going to type in the due date, which we're going to again extract from our invoice dot due. Okay, and there we go. We have our total due date, the total due sum, and the due date. Okay, so we're done with this. Next up, let's talk about index routes. Now, if I click on invoices on this link in the global nav, you will notice that the main content goes back to blank. Now, we can create a index route, which basically the index route fills an empty space. We use the index prop instead of the path, and that's because the index route shares the path of the parent. In other words, the index will render in the parent route outlet at the parent route's path. It will match when a parent route matches, but none of the other children match. Index are the default child routes for a parent route, and they render when the user hasn't clicked on one of the items in the navigation list yet. Okay, so let's do this by going to our index file, and I'm going to add it once for home, actually right after home. So within here, we're going to create another route, and instead of typing in 2, we're just going to type in index. Okay, now for the element, we are going to use exactly the same element that we use with just second right here. Okay, so main and so far and so on. Now let me paste this in here, and let's change the title to invoice app. And actually, well, I could link this to invoices. Now we can also add this route, a index route, right before our invoices, and use here, let's say, not going to use any links here, but what I am going to tell it is that, let's change this first of all to a paragraph tag, and where there are no invoices selected, then we're going to get this select a invoice. Okay, so let's save this, and this is a bit too large. It's because of the display. I just type in here text danger, and we need to refresh, and we don't need the container. Don't need this container, and we don't need the margin from the top. Padding, let's just have 2 padding. Let's type in an exclamation mark, and that's basically it. Now let's also take out the background color. Okay, so it's going to prompt us to select an invoice where there's no invoice selected. As soon as we select an invoice, then the index is going to go away. Okay, so next up, let's make our links active. So in order to know when a user is on a specific link, we can use something called navlink. Okay, and for this we're going to go into invoices. Let's go here, and instead of link, I'm going to replace this. I'm going to actually select all of them. So this, Control D. I'm going to use navlink. So navlink. Okay, so we have our navlink, and also adding a bit of conditional styling to it. This is really important because in order to differentiate which one of these links is active, we can do something like, let's just say, here's the class. Now instead of this, I'm going to do something else. First of all, I'm going to put in here a condition. For this, we're going to use, when a navlink is active, so right after this, we're going to use a condition. So if it is active, you can also do this with an if statement, but I'd rather use a much shorter version. So if is active, then let's have this class, but I'm actually going to replace this with, let me just have it in a copy. So copy, if this is active, then it's going to be BG primary, else is going to be BG white, and we don't need U anymore. And I forgot about the text, and also the text should be then text white. Okay, and there we go. Now whenever I click on one link, that is going to change the background to blue and the text to white. Okay, so now let's say we want to search for one specific company. Now, in our case, or in one specific invoice, in our case, we only have 5 invoices. Let's say we have 500 and want to search for some of them. Now, we can use the search params. And the search params are like URL params, but they sit in a different position in the URL. Instead of being in the normal URL segment, separated by /, they are at the end after the question mark. You see normal sites. So the React router has use search params, which works a lot like React use state, but stores and sets the state in the URL search parameters instead of in memory. Now let's add a little filter on the invoice nav list. So we're gonna go here right before our invoice, and let's add here a input tag. So I'm going to go underneath of it, input, and let's first of all give it a class name. Let's style it a bit of rounded pill, and it's going to take up the entire width, so width 100 and a padding of 2, and all around padding. Now let's hit save. There we go, there's our input. This is going to be our search. Now let's also grab onto the value. So the value will be whatever search parameter is going to be inserted here. Then we're going to use a filter method. But first things first, let's actually bring in our use search params. Okay, now let's go underneath our invoices and let's destructure it. So let search params and set search params. Exactly as I said, it's just like a use state. Search params, and we're going to use search param. Now back in our value, because it's already screaming at me, we're going to use the search params dot get, and we're going to get from here filter or a empty string. Okay, now also going to use a event called onChange, and wherever there is a change in here, then we're going to grab onto that event. Actually, we're going to first of all look for the event, then grab onto it, and let's first of all create a let filter variable, and we're going to assign it to event.target, so wherever it's targeted, and the target's value. So it's exactly just like in JavaScript. So if there is a filter, then the set search params is going to take in the filter, and if there's nothing, then set search params, and open close parentheses and open and close curly brackets. Okay, let's also get the placeholder. Actually, I need to go outside of it. Placeholder, and we're going to type in here search. Okay, so let's try and search for something, but we're not done yet. We also need to use the filter method on it. So on our invoices, going to now go ahead and right before the map, we're going to say filter, and we're going to filter invoice, and I'm going to return filtered invoice. First of all, I need the variable. So let filter, I'm going to assign it to search params, get filter, and if there is no filter, then return true. And then let's create another variable, let name, which we're going to assign to invoice.filter. I'm sorry about that, invoice.name, because we're searching for the name company. We're going to transform it to lowercase by using the two, not local, just two lowercase method on it. And then we're going to return the name dot start with, and we're going to in the start with method, we're going to use the filter dot two lowercase again method. Okay, so having this done, if I type in A, it's going to return Apple, and it's going to return NVIDIA. On M, it's going to return Microsoft and Manhattan Media, and so far and so on. If I type in I, it's going to return Microsoft, ME, Manhattan Media. Woo! Okay, now on to our very last step. Let's say we want to get rid of something from here. From our invoice, we already read the invoice, we already got paid, and let's get rid of one of them. Now, how can we achieve this? And this has something to do with navigating programmatically. Most of the time, the URL changes is in response to the user clicking on a link. But if you want to change the URL, in order to navigate programmatically, for example, to delete something, as I just said, in our case, the invoice, then you need to use something called use navigate. And this hook gives you an API to do so with. So first things first, let's go to our database again. Database and the data. Let's create another function. Let's call it export function with the name of delete invoice. And again, it's going to take an argument. And what our argument is going to pass in here, we're going to take that invoice. We're going to take our invoices and we're going to use filter this time. So invoices dot filter, and we're going to return a invoice that is going to match the invoice dot name dot number is not triple equal, double equal to the number. So basically, we're telling it to whatever is not this number should be returned. Okay, next up, let's import our use navigate. And for this, we need to go to our invoice. So invoice, and right at the use params, we can import now use navigate. Let's also assign it to a variable. Let navigate. We're going to assign this to use navigate. And now let's add a delete button to this. And right after the paragraph, so within the card, right after the paragraph tag, I'm going to use a button. Let's give this a class of btn and btn danger. I'm going to have a red button. Within here, I'm going to type in delete. And now for the functionality. So we're going to use an onClick event. And whenever we click on this button, we're going to use an arrow function, and it's going to call upon the delete invoice, which actually I didn't import. So let's import it up here. So delete oh yeah, I have it. Actually, it automatically imported. Hey, good job, React. Delete invoice, and we need to pass something in here. And we're going to pass in the invoice dot number. Okay. And after this, I'm also going to close this one up. And let's say navigate. We're going to use now use navigate. And within here, we're going to pass in slash whatever invoice is passed in here. So invoices. There should be double quotes. So let's just see. So open it up here. Where did I close this? Oh yeah, here. So let me wrap this one up into two curly brackets, and there we go. There's a delete button. Okay, so let's check it out if this works. Let's click on NVIDIA, click on delete, and there we go. It's gone. Let's search for something Tesla. Let's select Tesla and delete Tesla. Now, one problem I see to be having here is that the alignment is not how I want it. Let me just verify why that is. Okay, so I forgot to add a text center class to the invoices main div container. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's also delete Microsoft and Apple, and only Mainhard Media remains. Okay, everyone, so hope you enjoyed this project. If you did, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, thumbs down. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed, and please click that notification bell in order to get notified whenever we post new videos like this. Also check out my podcast, Weekly Code Quickies. Link is in the down in the description below. I'm on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all over the place. Also, it has a separate YouTube channel where we go over tech news, coding tricks and tips, and more. As always, I'm your host, Norbert BN, and with this being said, thank you so much for watching this video. Take care, bye-bye, catch you next time.